Like so many industries, wealth management has been transformed over the past few years. Trends that were already underway, such as customer expectations for digital interactions, a focus on investing with purpose, and a desire for access to a broader range of investment vehicles, have rapidly accelerated. At the same time, AI powered experiences across the customer journey are poised to transform how advisors and agents at wealth management firms can service their customers' needs. To help us understand dynamics in the marketplace and how wealth management firms can deliver the customer experience their clients demand, Chris McDonald, industry specialist for capital markets at Amazon Web Services, joins us in the CX Green Room. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Great to be here. Thank you for the invite. Looking forward to our conversation. So just quick background on me. As Greg said, I work in our capital markets development team and focus primarily on wealth management. I speak with our global customers regarding industry trends, cloud adoption, challenges, innovations within this space. I spent over 20 years in capital markets working with firms such as working at firms, I should say, such as JP Morgan, Goldman, Bloomberg, and now AWS.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So maybe just as a place to set the stage for our viewers, I talked about a couple trends in the introduction, but there are a number of trends that are transforming this industry. What strikes you? What macro trends would you highlight, and how they're kind of changing the landscape?
Yeah, so I think maybe there's three areas we can touch on there. First of all, like maybe a tech focus, customer focus, and then customer experience. They all overlap to a bit. But let's just kind of do it. So I think from a tech focus, what we've really seen a lot of change is being able to meet the customer in their channel of choice, right? So having those digital capabilities. So this will mean for customers being able to utilize mobile applications, being able to use desktops, being able to use their iPad for doing simple things as balance checks, but maybe also portfolio management, transaction balance. But then also, when it makes sense, talk to a chatbot or be able to go to a live agent or an advisor. Right? So I think that's really key in the space. And this has obviously been accelerated by the pandemic, as we saw branches closing down and they haven't continued to kind of open up, right? Customers are more comfortable and definitely want to be met in the channel of choice. Second to that, when we get to the kind of customer focus or the customer perspective, what I'm certainly seeing is a desire for holistic solutions. So not just a platform that allows me to, do some self-directed trading or can do some robo-advising. Customers are increasingly want to be able to do everything in one platform, be able to see everything, be able to do their trading if they want to, but also have some portfolio management, speak to an advisor, have some financial education, some financial planning. The list goes on, obviously. This kind of one-stop shop is really where customers get to. And then lastly, tied to all of that, the customer experience is key, right? That customer transformation. And I think about this in three areas. So one, accuracy. The second one, making sure customers understand products and markets. And then three, being able to join the dots. So let me just quickly kind of go through what I mean by that. So accuracy is absolutely key. So when we'll talk about today, and customers talk about this, and individuals talk about it, especially it's customer 360, personalization. That's great, but it needs to be accurate. It needs to be about Greg. It needs to be about Chris. It needs to be captured correctly. And then also, it's good to be able to explain markets and products to customers, but you've got to make sure that it's done in a way that it is suitable for each customer so they truly understand it. And then bringing those two together is joining the dots. It's all well and good having customer 360 or having all these products, etc., but you've got to be able to join the dots between those two. So as a firm, you're putting that right information in front of the correct customer.
Yeah, thank you for all of that, and we'll dive into some of those things as we go along here in our conversation. So that's all happening against this backdrop of changes in the population that's kind of seeking out wealth management, right? There's this expected transfer of wealth from baby boomers and Gen Xers to millennials and Gen Z, which I've seen numbers as high as $84 trillion, which I would absolutely stop and pick up on the sidewalk if I saw. There are also a lot of newly or expected to be affluent folks worldwide. So there's more demand for these wealth management services. And, that's against that backdrop that you were talking about. People have expectations for digital. They have expectations that when they reach out in their own channel, they're going to get the kind of service that they need. And they don't care about these distinctions necessarily of who am I talking to and am I in a branch or not. How do these trends, how is the industry preparing for all these folks and those expectations that they're bringing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so there is, right, there's the transfer of wealth, which you talked about. There's the rising kind of mass affluent population that we often hear about. But what also, right, is common theme to all of them is it's a tech savvy consumer base that's coming. So as we talked about the digital channels and what have you. So it's a game of scale is where the customers are at, right? So you're trying to deal with more customers, right, as the mass affluent space grows, but they also have a higher desire for what they want from those products. So how do you scale that space? Right? So this is where technology is coming into this in a big play, and where we're seeing a lot of customers, if they haven't already, they're starting to embark on their digital transformation, so on their cloud journey, or they're already born in the cloud. Why are they doing that? It's really about a data strategy as a start of it, right? So being able to create those data lakes, those data warehouses, those data meshes, whatever the kind of, the term is that they want to talk about. But you need to be able to take all of that data that you have on your firm and then external data, whatever, put it together and create that customer 360. And then as well as that, right, it's being able to use compute to do that. So you can kind of run those analytics. But then what sits on top of that are all these, my God, I'm going there too early. It's sitting those AI services on top of it, like kind of generative AI, IML, so you can build that out. And how does that allow for scale? Well, it's kind of in two ways, right? So we touched on the wealth transfer and also the rising mass affluent. So in the mass affluent, often that's in the direct-to-consumer kind of model, right? So that again is like putting that information in front of them and making sure that information is accurate and is correct, so you can service more people. But then in, say, the high net worth space where you got the advice space, it's the same, but it's a different channel. So you're now making that information available to an advisor, so they have to have more informed, better conversation with customers and not spending their time kind of preparing, getting information ready, or even dealing with onboarding, which is still a challenge today for a lot of firms.
Yeah, and it's. I'm glad you brought up data, because it can somewhat get overlooked, right? But if there isn't a robust data foundation, if there isn't the ability to connect all those dots, to borrow your phrase, then how can you possibly deliver the kind of service that folks are expecting on the customer side, but also just making it so much harder for your agents and advisors if they can't get access to all that data readily at hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's not easy, right? It's a challenge to do that. A lot of firms have that kind of data spaghetti kind of set up in their firm. So it's like getting access to that data. You have data consumers, data producers, do they allow that data to be shared? Data governance issues, data lineage. They're kind of working through all of that. And then also, like, there is so much more data becoming available, right? I forget the number, but it's exponential, right? What it's growing as we're dealing with more and more data. And there's more and more data. It's not just your market data. It's not just data about securities. It's data from individuals and what they're doing. Being able to pull that in and analyze that and cope with that sheer velocity of data is kind of where firms are trying to solve.
So you said the two magic letters in your last answer, AI. So every sector, of course, is being transformed by AI. Wealth management's no different in that regard. What do you have your eye on relative to AI in this space? And maybe, to the extent that it makes sense, tie it to that notion of having all the data in the customer 360.
Yeah, so let's take that as a given, right? You've sorted out your data. We've already kind of discussed that. But I think it's key to add, right? We've seen the explosion in the last 18 months, right? For the generative AI, large language model, foundation models has got everybody excited. But let's not forget, traditional AI has been transforming the industry for several years as well, right? So from using it for onboarding, right? It might be using services like we have as AWS Recognition for doing kind of anomaly detection of individuals, or intelligent document process for extracting details, right? Even for portfolio management. So there's still a place for just the traditional machine learning, which is kind of your inputs and your outputs and what you've worked on. But where it's really has started exploding and getting interested is obviously this generative AI being able to truly generate, create content and generate content. So what I've seen a lot in this space in particular, and starting off really an internal process, is being able to identify and understand semantics and being able to do that summarization piece. And where this has really been key is building of chatbots that are just that much more intelligent and conversational than they were, and also making them more domain specific to that firm's kind of knowledge. So, for example, customer wanting to build a document search tool, right? So it can have the kind of large language model there, sat there for the conversational interface, but then it's also being able to pull, kind of using a RAG infrastructure, their own documents, right? And pull that information from them so they can give back accurate results, accurate answers, and do that. And that is really changing a lot of workflows. So kind of from a chatbot perspective, and then also that true ability to understand semantics and summarization.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and maybe as a follow up to that, that you talked earlier in our conversation about how the mass affluent may be sometimes more apt or likely to interact with an agent, whereas the real high net worth folks are maybe talking with advisors all the time. But that ability to understand all that language context and get the semantic meaning from all of those interactions, like it feels like there's a big potential positive impact on all of those kinds of interactions with a client to be able to get that data, get that summarization and do stuff with it.
Yeah, 100%. So the chatbot can be applied to many different kind of models, right? And we're seeing that being used a lot internally with human in the loop and kind of asking these questions and doing it. But also remember that chatbot, so that's so much kind of like in the high net worth space, right? Being used, right, for when kind of doing summarization, pulling meetings together, understanding what customers are doing. But I think when we get to the mass affluent, it plays a role as well in the contact center, right? You think of us, we had like AWS Connect, and we had kind of post-call analytics using services such as Bedrock on top of that. And where it really plays a role is like, maybe that chatbot, first of all, can answer more questions correctly and accurately and in a way that, delights a customer and they don't need to speak to an agent. Or then if they do get onto an agent, they can have a more informed and better conversation because the agent is going to be fed more information on insights and next best recommendations to put in front of that customer. But then really the additional point where it really comes into play is you're now able to analyze all those calls that come through a call center and understand what actually happened in them. So is the customer happy? Did the agent answer those questions? What did we miss? What else do we need to do? So being able to summarize all calls and pull out that information is huge in being able to kind of grow that experience and improve.
Yeah, well, it's also, it strikes me as being potentially really interesting, particularly in a space like wealth management, where both that data in the aggregate, looking across all the calls, all the advisors, all the clients, and understanding like what are people asking, where do we have pain points that could help us maybe make our digital experiences better, things like that. But also within the context of specific agents and helping them be better at their jobs with coaching. And even maybe on a client basis, like these folks are asking about these things. Maybe we should be offering a new set of services or bringing up topics that we might not otherwise have known.
Yeah, I think it surfaces a lot of kind of very interesting information that you may not, normally be able to gather and so forth. So I think we're starting to see that with customers already. Firms are putting, as we call them, PCA, post-call analytics kind of procedures in place to be able to glean that additional information. So you can, like you say, maybe there are new products to be built, new solutions, new workflows to be built, helps identify those challenge points that you may not have realized were there before.
Yeah, and we couldn't have done without something like generative AI sort of doing the heavy lifting in the background, right?
Yeah.
So let's kind of take a slight step in a different direction. So, I might think of wealth management firms as generally speaking being pretty large. And so, yeah, they've got the technical ability and sort of the need, if you will, to take on things like cloud and take on things like AI and automation and, good call out that regular old machine learning and other, AI technologies are still around. But it probably doesn't matter over much how big you are as a wealth management firm. You've still got customers who are bringing these kinds of demands, and you want to be able to offer the kinds of services that you've been talking about, Chris. So, how do you think about the need for these technologies, cloud, AI, et cetera, regardless of the scale of the wealth management firm in question?
Yeah, no, great question, right? You often think about these bank-owned wealth management firms, are they kind of the only ones in a position to kind of solve for this? But no, we can just look at kind of what's happened over the last 5-10 years, right? We look at some of the large self-directed firms, self-directed kind of brokerage firms that have been born in the cloud. They're massive now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Built within the AWS infrastructure. There's a lot of examples of that. And still to this day, right, you've got a lot of fintechs that are coming into this space that are solving, particularly going after kind of that mass affluent sector, but also as well playing into that high net worth space, being able to kind of build out, like I was talking to earlier, right, by utilizing the kind of power and capability of the cloud, you can build out these platforms. So what is being able to use the cloud, what does enable customers to do? You can, as we're talking about data strategy, right, you have those databases, you have that data strategy there available to you. You can spin up services such as S3 that you need to in order to be able to create that database. And then you can build up compute and you can start to kind of build as you need rather than having to provision for everything. So firms are doing it. Then you start to then build kind of different services on top of that, taking advantage of some of these capabilities that we've talked about within AI, ML, and generative AI. And firms are doing this and they're innovating in their experiment. Something works, great, we're off to the races. Let's continue building. Let's put something didn't quite work as a crazy at it. Okay, it's fine. It was a great experiment. We learned from it. Let's move on. Let's kind of move on to the next thing. So I think you're seeing, it's very much, a lot of firms are able to come into the space and work in the space. And what we're seeing as well, as you mentioned, those larger traditional firms, they're working out as well. How do they kind of re-architect? How do they kind of do their digital transformation? If they haven't already started, how do they ramp it up? What else do they need to do?
Yeah. So fascinating. Okay, so let's shift a tiny bit to kind of that contact center and that agent experience that you've touched on. So regardless of industry, customers want empathetic, effective, personalized customer service, right? Those are sort of table stakes. And then you layer in all that digital and channel expectations that you touched on at the beginning of the conversation, Chris. But the wealth management might be a little bit different in some regards, right? People's financial futures are at stake. There's more concern perhaps around fraud. Clients want that frictionless service, especially as maybe they're sort of moving up the wealth ladder. How is customer service and the customer experience in the wealth management space evolving, and what kind of are you watching there?
So I think it's really interesting, and you kind of touched on this point. And a word that I often use within this financial services space is trust, right? Customers have to have a lot of trust within your firm. And what I mean by that is, like you said, the very emotional decisions that customers may be making, right? So they need to be they need to be comfortable that they're making informed decisions that they want to do. And it's kind of what I talked to earlier, right? Being able to connect the dots. So if you're going to solve at scale, which is what we're talking about with some of the kind of the mass affluent and this growing customer base, you need to be able to gain that customer's trust that what you're doing and what you're putting in front of them is correct and is right for them. So I think one example that I come back to is, right, robo-advising was very much all the hype. Now it's a little bit of a dirty word. Sometimes some people want it, some people don't, but it still has its place, right? And everyone's doing that. But if we think that through a moment, if you start to build all of this, or you have available all of this kind of customer 360 data, and then you're starting to identify in an individual that had like a major life event or something happened and they're going to have to make a large investment, perhaps it's buying some kind of a product, or maybe it's buying a house or whatever. It's understanding how you should interact with that person, right? So then it's like, okay, potentially they don't want to talk to a chatbot about this thing, right? But I need to be able to talk to an advisor. So then we get to this kind of evolving world that I'm seeing of hybrid advice. It's like, when is it time to bring like an advisor or an agent into this conversation rather than just being on the website? So it's being able to build out at scale and understand this personalization, but then also what is the appropriate time, and when is it kind of the right channel? When is the right product to put in front of that customer? So being very aware of that customer and being able to gain their trust.
Yeah, and doing it in a way that both from the customer's perspective, but also that agent or advisor who picks it up, if you will, from the web chat or the bot, having all that context, and it isn't like, oh, so why are you calling us today, right? They know we've been talking about a house and that kind of thing.
Right? Isn't that key? It's so key that you're not kind of going over old ground. You're not having them rehash. We've all been through those experiences in other different kind of industries that we would have to kind of talk to, but being sure that you have that full picture and that you're really aware, of the customer and what they need and what they want, and being able to guide them appropriately.
Yeah, so important. So sticking with the agents for a second, like in sort of broad terms, how is technology helping them deliver that kind of exceptional service, and for the and for the advisors as well? I mean, you've touched on a number of things, but how do we see technology evolving to help them really deliver on that kind of personalized and accurate, to use your word, sort of service?
Yeah, one word I'm surprised I haven't touched on yet, which is very big within a lot of the conversations I have, is a single pane of glass. And what we mean by this single pane of glass, think of a dashboard, think of a GUI that sits in front of a customer, or it may sit in front of an advisor or in front of an agent. But in that single pane of glass, it has all of the relevant information on that customer, right? On their accounts, on their portfolios, their interests, risk aversions, but then also it's able to surface insights about that individual and kind of all of the next best recommendations. And all this work is being done behind the scenes because you've built out that data strategy that you need, and you're using additional kind of AML, generative AI services to be able to create those insights and be able to have that correct information. And it may even, or also, right, be working on the fly. So let's say if you're in a contact center and you're having a conversation, that call is being transcribed and listened to as you work on it, and it's updating based on that information that we have, right? So you're able to hook into whatever the CRM system that a firm may be using and pull that information back. So you're making these kind of informed kind of insights to the customer. So the single pane of glass is really where most of my conversations are getting to. Again, whether that's to put it on a website, put it on a mobile application in front of that consumer so you have it, or whether it's sitting on top of a desktop for an advisor so that when they're having those conversations. But the single pane of glass is a key piece where they try and get to.
Yeah. It's such an interesting concept. And, I just think about myself as a consumer, just in general. I don't want to have to think about, why do I have to have this different experience on my mobile device versus my iPad versus the desktop versus the telephone? Like, I should be able to do sort of what I want wherever I want. And so that, having that single pane of glass for everybody involved so that they can actually have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, I think customers do see this in other industries, right? They're able to see kind of some of this happening. So it's kind of catching up to where the customer experiences in some of the other industries that customers are aware of.
Yeah. Okay, so this has been a fantastic conversation, and as we sort of turn towards the final post here, for folks watching at home and they're on their own kind of journey to deliver a better and stellar customer experience, what advice would you have for them?
I think touched on a lot here, but kind of making sure you're ready. There's a lot of innovative efficiency, operational changes that are happening right now, right? And it's going to continue to grow. I think it's been, like I said, it's exploded over the last 18 months with obviously the excitement around generative AI, but we're still really just kind of starting to explore that. As firms get more comfortable understanding what generative AI can do and how can they control like hallucinations, and get more comfortable with the regulatory landscape, and as the regulatory landscape, starts to kind of understand what can be done, we're going to continue to see this kind of grow and evolve. But I think make sure you're available to take advantage. So it touches on what we've kind of been the underlying theme was, make sure you have a good data strategy in place so that you're able to start using these services and building those single pane of glass, taking advantage of the contact centers, being able to use these tools and do this. So the data is key as always.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Chris McDonald from Amazon Web Services. We've been talking about AI and how it's changing the customer experience in wealth management. Thanks for watching the CX Green Room, and we'll see you next time.